A furious mom explodes at a Little League game. A quiet single dad holds his boy close. Then the crowd gasps. He's not just any dad. He's the new mayor. From that moment, the town catches fire. Whispers in the stands. Side eyes at school. A storm of rumors. But this dad won't fight with hate. He builds a program to bring kids together. For a night, it works. The shy boy speaks. Hearts melt. Until a shocking claim lands like a hammer. The mayor is a fraud. Now trust cracks. The boy goes silent, and the town turns cold. Yet there's a secret someone is hiding, one that could clear a name or destroy a family. When the truth finally hits, will courage and forgiveness save these kids? Or will one cruel lie tear a town apart? The morning sun cast long shadows across the freshly mowed baseball field as parents and children filed through the chain-link gate. The smell of cut grass, mixed with the familiar scent of leather mitts and morning dew, creating that special Saturday morning baseball atmosphere that brought the whole community together. Daniel Harper knelt beside his son Lucas on the wooden bench near the dugout, his gentle hands working carefully with the boy's cleats. "Almost got it, buddy," he said softly, threading the laces through the metal eyelets. Lucas fidgeted nervously, his eyes darting around at the other kids warming up on the field. "What if I mess up again, Dad?" Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible above the cheerful chaos of pre-game excitement. Daniel paused and looked up at his son's worried face. "Hey, remember what we talked about? It's not about being perfect. It's about trying your best and having fun." He gave Lucas's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, earning a small smile in return. Across the field, Karen Mitchell's sharp voice cut through the morning air like a knife. "Brandon, stand up straight when I'm talking to you." She yanked at her son's uniform, smoothing out invisible wrinkles, while Brandon stood rigid, his face a mask of forced patience. "I won't have you looking sloppy out there. The scout from the travel team might be watching today." Brandon's shoulders slumped slightly. "Yes, Mom," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on his cleats. The game began with its usual energy. Kids running, coaches calling out encouragement, and parents cheering from the metal bleachers. Lucas started on the bench, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, while Brandon took his position at shortstop, his mother's critical gaze following his every move. In the third inning, Lucas finally got his chance to play. Daniel watched proudly as his son jogged out to right field, trying to stand tall despite his obvious nervousness. When Brandon hit a single in the bottom of the inning, he gave Lucas a friendly wave as he passed by the outfield. Lucas waved back, a genuine smile spreading across his face. The next inning, during a break in play, Brandon wandered over to where Lucas stood in right field. "Hey," Brandon said, kicking at the grass. "Nice catch earlier." Lucas beamed. "Thanks. You're really good at batting." The boys chatted easily, sharing baseball tips and jokes, their laughter carrying across the field. It was a natural friendship forming, the kind that happens when kids are just allowed to be kids. But the moment of peace shattered when Karen's voice thundered across the field. "Brandon Mitchell." She stormed toward the boys, her designer sneakers kicking up dust, face twisted in fury. "What do you think you're doing?" Brandon froze, his earlier ease evaporating instantly. "We were just talking, Mom." Karen grabbed Brandon's arm, yanking him backward. Her eyes blazed with contempt as she glared at Lucas, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Keep your dirty brat away from my son," she screamed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The field fell silent. Parents in the bleachers stopped mid-conversation. Kids paused their warm-ups. Even the coaches stood speechless, their clipboards hanging limply at their sides. Lucas's lower lip trembled, his eyes filling with tears. He looked around desperately, seeing all the shocked faces staring at him, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes watching his humiliation. His small shoulders began to shake. "Dad?" His voice cracked as he called out, barely above a whisper. Daniel was already moving, crossing the field with long strides, his face calm, but his eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. Lucas broke into a run, meeting his father halfway and burying his face in Daniel's shirt. Karen stood her ground, one hand still gripping Brandon's arm, her lip curled in a sneer of satisfaction. Brandon looked at Lucas with helpless eyes, his face a mixture of shame and apology. "It's okay, buddy," Daniel murmured, kneeling down to hold his trembling son. "It's okay." He could feel Lucas's tears soaking through his shirt, could feel the small body shaking with silent sobs. The whispers started in the bleachers, spreading like ripples in a pond. Parents leaned toward each other, speaking behind raised hands, their eyes darting between Karen's triumphant stance and Daniel comforting his son. How dare she? Poor little Lucas. Who does she think she is? But Karen seemed to feed off the attention, standing taller, her designer sunglasses perched perfectly on her nose as she guided Brandon back toward the dugout. Her heels clicked against the hard-packed dirt, each step a punctuation mark of her perceived victory. Daniel continued to hold Lucas, one hand gently rubbing circles on his back, the other cradling the back of his head. He didn't look up at Karen, didn't acknowledge the whispers, didn't do anything except focus on his son's needs in that moment. "I want to go home," Lucas whispered into his father's shirt. "I know, buddy," Daniel replied softly, still holding him close. "I know." The tension hung thick in the air, like storm clouds gathering before rain. Parents shifted uncomfortably in the bleachers, coaches huddled together in discussion, and kids stood frozen in their positions, unsure whether to continue the game or not. Through it all, Karen's satisfied smirk remained fixed in place as she situated Brandon on the bench, fussing over his uniform once again, acting as if she hadn't just crushed a child's spirit in front of the entire community. Coach Reynolds strode across the field, his weathered baseball cap pulled low over his concerned eyes. The murmurs from the bleachers grew louder as parents shook their heads at Karen's outburst. She stood with her arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth while Daniel held his trembling son close. "Now, folks, let's all take a breath here," Coach Reynolds said, his calm voice carrying across the tense silence. He placed a reassuring hand on Lucas's shoulder. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, but he managed to stand a little straighter at the coach's touch. "Mrs. Mitchell," Coach Reynolds continued, turning to face Karen, "that kind of behavior isn't what we're about here. Every child on this team deserves respect." Karen lifted her chin. "I have every right to decide who my son associates with. Some of us have standards to maintain." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Brandon Mitchell stared at his shoes, his face flushed with embarrassment. His baseball mitt hung limply at his side, knuckles white from gripping it too hard. Coach Reynolds removed his cap and ran a hand through his gray hair. A small smile appeared on his face. "You know, Mrs. Mitchell, I think it's time everyone here knew something." He turned to address the gathered families. "Folks, I don't know if you've all had the pleasure of meeting Daniel Harper properly yet. Some of you might recognize him better as our newly elected mayor." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of shocked disbelief. Her face, previously flushed with righteous indignation, drained of color so quickly she swayed slightly on her feet. "That's right," Coach Reynolds continued, his voice warming with pride. "Mayor Harper ran on a platform of unity and kindness in our community. He's been quietly volunteering with our youth programs for years, even before running for office. Never one to make a fuss about himself, but always there when someone needs help." The bleachers erupted in supportive applause. Parents who had been hesitant to get involved now stood up, their faces showing a mixture of admiration for Daniel and disapproval for Karen's behavior. Sarah Thompson, who ran the local bakery, called out from the stands, "Lucas is welcome to play with my Tommy anytime." Other parents joined in with similar offers, their voices overlapping in a chorus of support. Daniel raised his hand in a modest gesture of thanks, his other arm still protectively around Lucas's shoulders. "I appreciate everyone's kindness," he said, his voice steady and warm. "But I'm just another dad here today, watching his son play baseball. That's all that matters right now." His simple humility only seemed to endear him more to the crowd. Several parents made their way down from the bleachers to shake his hand and introduce themselves properly. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter played second base, brought Lucas a bottle of water and told him about her daughter's upcoming birthday party, making sure he knew he was invited. Brandon took a hesitant step toward Lucas, but Karen's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. Her fingers dug into his uniform sleeve as she yanked him back. The boy winced, but didn't resist. "Come on, Brandon, we're leaving," Karen hissed through clenched teeth. Her heels sank into the soft dirt as she marched toward the parking lot, practically dragging her son behind her. Brandon looked back over his shoulder once, his face a mask of longing and regret, before his mother pulled him around the corner of the concession stand and out of sight. Coach Reynolds watched them go, shaking his head sadly. He turned back to the field and clapped his hands.
"All right, team. Let's get back to baseball. Jimmy, you're up to bat."
The children scrambled back to their positions, the game gradually resuming its normal rhythm. Parents returned to their seats, though now they called out encouragement to all the players, not just their own children. Lucas joined his teammates in the dugout, accepting their pats on the back and friendly nudges with a small but growing smile. Daniel took a seat in the bleachers, and one by one, parents came to sit near him. They spoke of everyday things: school fundraisers, local businesses, upcoming community events. But beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of genuine warmth and inclusion. Each handshake and introduction carried the weight of a simple message: you and your son belong here. The morning sun continued its climb into the sky, the earlier shadows of doubt and division giving way to the bright light of community support. On the field, children played with renewed enthusiasm, their laughter and shouts drowning out any lingering tension from the earlier confrontation. The kitchen in the Harper home glowed with warm yellow light from the old fixture above the small wooden table. Steam rose from 2 plates of spaghetti, the red sauce a bright splash of color against the white ceramic. Daniel twirled pasta onto his fork, watching his son push meatballs around his plate without taking a bite. Lucas sat hunched in his chair, his baseball uniform still dusty from the morning's game. His cleats lay discarded by the back door, one tipped over on its side. The quiet between father and son felt heavy, filled with unspoken words. "Dad?" Lucas's voice was barely above a whisper. He kept his eyes fixed on his plate. "Yes, buddy?" Daniel set down his fork, giving his son his full attention. "Why does Mrs. Mitchell hate us?" The question hung in the air like a weight. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just playing with Brandon." Daniel's heart ached. He reached across the small table and placed his hand over his son's smaller one. "Lucas, look at me." He waited until those brown eyes, so much like his mother's, met his. "Mrs. Mitchell doesn't hate us. She's carrying around something heavy in her heart that makes her act unkindly." "What do you mean?" Lucas's forehead wrinkled in confusion. "Sometimes people judge others without really knowing them," Daniel explained, choosing his words carefully. "They make assumptions based on what they see on the outside, or because someone is different from them. That's called prejudice." Lucas rolled a meatball with his fork. "Because we don't have a lot of money? Because I don't have a mom?" Daniel squeezed his son's hand. "Those things don't define who we are, Lucas. What matters is how we treat others and the kindness we show to the world. That's what makes us who we are." "But it hurts," Lucas admitted, his voice cracking. "I tried so hard to be nice. Brandon and I were having fun. And then," his shoulders slumped, "I wish I was normal, like the other kids, with nice clothes and a big house, and he couldn't finish." Daniel stood up and moved to kneel beside his son's chair. "Hey, look at me again." He gently turned Lucas to face him. "You are perfect exactly as you are. Being normal? That's not what's important. What's important is being true to yourself and treating others with kindness, even when they're not kind to you." "But why?" Lucas asked, tears welling in his eyes. "Why should we be nice when they're mean to us?" "Because kindness is stronger than cruelty," Daniel said firmly. "It takes more courage to stay kind when faced with meanness. And you, Lucas Harper, are one of the bravest, kindest people I know." A small smile tugged at Lucas's lips. "Really? Really?" Daniel pulled him into a tight hug. "We're going to get through this together, okay? You and me. Team Harper, remember?" Lucas nodded against his father's shoulder. Team Harper. And you know what else? Daniel pulled back to look at his son. God gave us challenges sometimes to make us stronger, to teach us important lessons about love and forgiveness. Even when it's really hard, especially when it's really hard. Daniel stood up and ruffled Lucas's hair. "Now, how about we actually eat this spaghetti before it gets cold?" Lucas picked up his fork with renewed energy. "Can we have ice cream after?" "I think we've earned some ice cream today," Daniel chuckled. Across town, in a large house with pristine white columns, Karen Mitchell sat rigid at her elegant dining room table. Her china clinked sharply as she stabbed at her salmon with more force than necessary. The morning's humiliation burned in her chest like acid. "The nerve of that man," she muttered, her knife scraping against the plate. "Acting so noble, so above it all. He's probably fooled this whole town with his kindness campaign." Brandon pushed his peas around his plate, not daring to look up. The chandelier light caught the crystal glasses, casting rainbow reflections on the tablecloth. "And now he's mayor?" Karen's voice rose. "Mayor? As if someone like him could possibly understand what this town needs. Well, we'll see about that." Her mind raced with possibilities, schemes forming and taking shape. She'd lived in this town her whole life, knew all the right people, all the right buttons to push. Daniel Harper might have won the election, but she'd make sure his tenure was short-lived. Later that night, Lucas lay tucked into bed, his baseball mitt on the nightstand beside him. His breathing had evened out into the peaceful rhythm of sleep, and Daniel stood in the doorway, watching his son's chest rise and fall. The house was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the ceiling fan. Daniel made his way to the kitchen table, now cleared of dinner dishes. He spread out several notebooks and started writing, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the still night air. His community outreach program needed to be perfect. He jotted down ideas. After-school programs that would bring children from all backgrounds together. Community events that would help neighbors connect. Initiatives that would break down the invisible barriers that divided their town. Daniel paused in his writing to massage his temples. The day's events weighed heavy on his shoulders, but his resolve remained unshaken. He had promised Lucas that kindness was stronger than cruelty, and he intended to prove it. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as he continued working, filling page after page with notes and plans. His coffee grew cold beside him, but he barely noticed, too focused on his vision for bringing their community together. In his bedroom down the hall, Lucas slept peacefully. His earlier tears dried, his father's words of encouragement still echoing in his dreams. A small smile played on his lips as he clutched his worn teddy bear close, feeling safe and loved despite the day's difficulties. The Bell Bean Coffee Shop buzzed with its usual Monday morning crowd. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the cozy space, where golden sunlight streamed through the front windows. Karen Mitchell perched at her favorite corner table, her designer handbag placed carefully on the empty chair beside her. Her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around her vanilla latte as she held court with several other mothers from the baseball league. "You should have seen how aggressive he was," Karen said, lowering her voice for dramatic effect. Her audience, 3 women in yoga pants and pristine athleisure wear, leaned in closer. "I was just trying to protect the children, you know? But the way Daniel Harper came at me." She shuddered delicately. Sarah Peters, whose son played second base, furrowed her brow. "But I thought the coach said—" "Oh, please," Karen cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Being mayor doesn't make someone stable. Have you noticed how that boy of his barely speaks? Always drawing those strange pictures, lurking in the dugout. I hate to say it, but there's something not right there. The women exchanged uncertain glances. Jenny Thompson, whose daughter took dance classes with Karen's niece, cleared her throat. Lucas seems sweet enough. Quiet, maybe. But… Sweet? Karen's eyes widened. Did you know what happened at their last school? I heard things. Terrible things. She didn't elaborate, letting their imaginations fill in the blanks. I mean, why else would a single father suddenly move back here and run for mayor? People don't just do that without a reason. The whispers spread like ripples in a pond. As morning regulars came and went, fragments of Karen's story traveled with them. By mid-morning, the narrative had shifted. Daniel Harper wasn't just a single dad trying his best. He was unstable, possibly dangerous. His son wasn't just shy, he was troubled. At City Hall, Daniel noticed the change immediately. The usual warm greetings from staff turned into quick nods and averted eyes. Walking into his first meeting of the day, he caught Susan from Parks and Recreation pulling her papers closer when he sat down next to her. During the budget review, Daniel presented his plans for community improvement with his usual careful attention to detail. But instead of the engaged responses he typically received, he faced a room of skeptical faces. When he suggested expanding the youth sports program, Thomas Wheeler, usually his strongest supporter, coughed and mentioned liability concerns. In the break room, conversations stopped when he entered. Margaret, who had worked at City Hall for 20 years and always saved him a cookie from her weekly baking, suddenly remembered she had important filing to do when he approached. The weight of judgment pressed heavier with each passing hour. Daniel maintained his composure, but inside, his stomach churned. He'd faced opposition before it came with being mayor, but this felt different. This wasn't about policies or budgets. This was personal. And worse, it involved Lucas. By late afternoon, Daniel couldn't focus on the stack of permits waiting for his signature. The whispers had grown loud enough that his assistant, Jim, finally broke the uncomfortable silence. "Sir," Jim hesitated, shuffling papers on his desk. "Maybe you should take the rest of the day off." "Clear your head?" Daniel looked up, noting the concern in Jim's eyes. It wasn't judgment there, at least, but something almost worse. Pity. He nodded slowly, gathering his coat and briefcase. The walk home would do him good. Give him time to think. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under his feet as he made his way through the town he'd grown up in, the place he'd chosen to raise his son. Each familiar storefront and street corner held memories, but now they felt tainted. He passed Mrs. Rodriguez's flower shop, where she usually waved cheerfully through the window. Today, she was suddenly very busy arranging roses. His shoulders grew heavier with each block, the weight of responsibility and hurt pressing down. He'd promised Lucas a better life here, promised himself he could make a difference in this town. Now he wondered if he'd been naive to think kindness alone could overcome prejudice. But as he rounded the corner onto maple-lined Cedar Street, he saw something that made his heart lift. There was Lucas, waiting in their small front yard, baseball glove in hand and hope shining in his eyes. His son's face lit up at the sight of him, waving the glove excitedly. "Dad, can we practice catching? I really want to get better for the next game." The sight of his son, resilient and eager despite everything, straightened Daniel's shoulders. The whispers and cold shoulders faded away, replaced by something more important, the trust in his son's eyes, the pure belief that together they could face anything. The Saturday morning sun painted the neighborhood in warm, gentle light as Daniel unloaded trash bags and gardening tools from his trunk. Lucas stood close by, fidgeting with the oversized work gloves his father had given him. His eyes darted nervously between the scattered litter along the street and the empty sidewalks. "Are you sure anyone's coming, Dad?" Lucas whispered, inching closer to Daniel's side. Daniel squeezed his son's shoulder. "Even if it's just us today, buddy, we're doing something good for our community." He handed Lucas a bright orange safety vest that matched his own. Sometimes, the right thing starts small. The neighborhood park had seen better days. Candy wrappers dotted the grass like confetti, and stray papers fluttered against the chain-link fence. Daniel pulled on his work gloves and knelt beside a cluster of weeds growing through cracks in the sidewalk. "Want to help me with these?" he asked Lucas, who nodded and dropped to his knees beside his father. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before the scuff of approaching footsteps made Lucas tense. Daniel looked up to see Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 streets over, leading her twin daughters who carried child-sized rakes. "Mayor Harper," Mrs. Rodriguez called out warmly, "we saw your flyer at the grocery store. The girls insisted on coming to help." The twins, Amy and Anna, rushed over to Lucas. "Can we help you with the weeds?" Amy asked, while Anna already started pulling at a stubborn dandelion. Lucas's shoulders relaxed as he showed them the proper way to grip the roots, just as his father had taught him. Soon, their small group grew as more neighbors arrived. Mr. Chen with his teenage son, the elderly Johnson couple, and 3 boys from Lucas's class at school. The morning hummed with activity and casual conversation. Daniel moved between groups, offering water bottles and guidance, his heart warming at the sight of Lucas gradually opening up to his peers as they worked together to fill trash bags and clear overgrown areas. A familiar blue SUV crawled past the park, and Daniel glimpsed Karen Mitchell's stern face through the windshield. She was dropping Brandon off at baseball practice at the nearby field. Minutes later, to everyone's surprise, Brandon appeared at the park's entrance, still in his practice uniform. "Practice got canceled," Brandon announced to no one in particular, his eyes finding Lucas. "Can I help?" Lucas looked uncertainly at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "Sure," Lucas said softly, offering Brandon a spare pair of gloves. "We're cleaning up around the swing sets now." The 2 boys worked side by side, their earlier awkwardness melting away as they tackled the task together. Soon, their laughter joined the chorus of conversation and rustling trash bags. Other kids gravitated toward them, forming an impromptu team to clean the playground equipment. "You've got quite a gift for bringing people together, Mayor Harper," Mrs. Johnson commented as she handed Daniel a bottle of water. "This is exactly what our town needed." Daniel watched as Brandon showed Lucas and the others how to create a relay line to pass filled trash bags more efficiently. "The kids are the ones showing us the way," he replied. "They don't see the barriers we adults sometimes put up." Throughout the morning, more residents stopped by, some to help, others just to chat. Each conversation felt like a small bridge being built, every shared smile a step toward the unified community Daniel had envisioned. Even those who had seemed distant at City Hall now approached him with genuine warmth. "Thank you for doing this, Mayor Harper," Mr. Chen said as his son joined the growing group of kids. "Sometimes we forget that leadership isn't just about meetings and policies. It's about rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty." By early afternoon, the park looked transformed. Fresh mulch surrounded the newly weeded flower beds. The playground gleamed, and every piece of litter had been properly disposed of. The kids had moved on to playing an impromptu game of tag, their work gloves discarded but their energy undiminished. Lucas's face was flushed with exercise and excitement as he ran with his new friends, his earlier shyness forgotten in the joy of play. Brandon matched him stride for stride, their shared laughter carrying across the park. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the cleaned park, parents began calling their children home. Daniel's heart swelled as he watched Lucas exchange high fives with his new friends, including a special one with Brandon. Through the corner of his eye, Daniel noticed Karen's SUV parked across the street. She sat rigid behind the wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Brandon, still laughing and talking with Lucas as they helped pack up the last of the cleaning supplies. But for once, Daniel didn't let Karen's presence dampen his spirits. The day had proven what he'd always believed, that kindness could bridge divides, that community could triumph over conflict. Looking at Lucas's smile, watching him interact freely with his peers, Daniel felt a spark of hope take root in his heart. Brandon waved goodbye to Lucas, his genuine smile a stark contrast to his mother's scowl visible through the car window. As the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel and Lucas gathered the last of their supplies, their work gloves dirty, but their spirits lifted by the day's simple victories. The Monday morning air felt heavy as Daniel's old sedan pulled up to Riverside Elementary. Through the windshield, he could see clusters of parents huddled near the school entrance, their heads bent together in hushed conversation. Lucas sat quietly in the passenger seat, his baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "Ready for another week, champ?" Daniel tried to keep his voice cheerful, but he noticed how his son's shoulders hunched forward. "I guess so," Lucas mumbled, clutching his backpack tighter. They stepped out of the car together, and Daniel immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. Mrs. Peterson, who usually waved warmly, suddenly became fascinated with her phone. Mr. Johnson, whose daughter was in Lucas's class, steered his child to the far side of the walkway. Most painful was watching Sarah Williams, Lucas's friend since kindergarten, being yanked away by her mother. "Come on, sweetie, let's use the other entrance," the woman said loudly enough for them to hear, casting a disapproving glance in their direction. Lucas's head dropped lower, his chin nearly touching his chest. Daniel felt a familiar ache in his heart, the same one he'd experienced when his wife passed away and he'd had to watch their son navigate that loss alone. "Hey," Daniel said softly, kneeling down to Lucas's level. "Remember what we talked about? About being brave?" Lucas nodded without looking up. "But it's hard, Dad. I know, buddy. I know it is." Daniel straightened his son's backpack straps, a small gesture of normalcy in this increasingly abnormal situation. "But you've got that math test today, right? Show them what you've got in here." He tapped Lucas's forehead gently. A ghost of a smile crossed Lucas's face before he trudged up the steps, his shoulders still slumped, but his head lifted just slightly higher. Daniel watched until his son disappeared through the heavy school doors, then drove to City Hall, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The familiar brick building loomed ahead, its American flag snapping in the brisk morning breeze. Inside his office, his assistant Janet was already waiting, her usually calm face pinched with concern. She closed the door behind him with a soft click. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, clutching a stack of papers to her chest. "The situation is getting worse." He sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "What now?" Janet spread several printed emails across his desk. "These came in over the weekend. 3 different community board members are questioning your fitness for office. They're saying..." She hesitated, her voice dropping. "They're saying you've been using your position to secure special treatment for Lucas at school." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. Lucas is struggling enough as it is. I know that. But Karen Mitchell has been very busy." Janet's lips pressed into a thin line. "She's telling anyone who'll listen that you manipulated the baseball team selections to get Lucas on the best team. She's claiming you pressured teachers to give him better grades." "Better grades?" Daniel let out a hollow laugh. "Lucas earns every mark himself. He studies for hours." "There's more," Janet continued reluctantly. "She's suggesting you've been allocating city resources for personal use. Something about materials from the Parks Department being delivered to your house? The community cleanup supplies." Daniel realized, his stomach sinking. Everything was documented. It was a public event. "I know, but she's twisting it, making it sound like you're running some kind of personal landscaping scheme with city money." Janet sat down across from him. "Daniel, people are listening to her. The council meeting next week. There's already talk about launching an investigation." Daniel stared at the family photo on his desk, him and Lucas at the lake last summer, both grinning widely, fishing poles in hand. That felt like a lifetime ago now. The day crawled by in a blur of meetings and sideways glances. Even council members who'd supported him for years now seemed hesitant to meet his eyes. By late afternoon, Daniel had counted 6 canceled appointments and numerous whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered rooms. When evening finally arrived, he picked up Lucas from his after-school program. The drive home was quiet. broken only by the soft sound of Lucas picking at a loose thread on his backpack strap. In their kitchen, Daniel worked on making spaghetti, Lucas's favorite, while his son half-heartedly pushed homework papers around the table. The sauce was just starting to simmer when Lucas spoke. His voice, small but clear. "Dad? Yeah, buddy? Maybe." Lucas swallowed hard. "Maybe I should quit baseball." The wooden spoon Daniel was holding clattered against the pot. He turned from the stove to face his son, whose eyes were fixed firmly on the table. "Why would you say that?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. "If I quit, maybe people would stop being mad at you." Lucas's voice wobbled. "Maybe Karen would leave us alone, and the other kids' parents would let them play with me again." Daniel's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. He pulled out the chair next to Lucas and sat down, waiting until his son finally looked up at him. "Lucas, listen to me carefully," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We don't quit doing things we love just because some people want us to. That's not how we handle problems." "But everyone hates us now," Lucas whispered. "Not everyone," Daniel corrected. "And those who do," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Those who do are scared of what they don't understand. But we're gonna face this together, okay? Just like we faced everything else." Lucas's eyes welled with tears. "Promise? I promise." Daniel pulled his son into a tight hug, feeling the small tremors running through the boy's body. "We're a team. You and me. And teams stick together." The spaghetti sauce began to bubble over on the stove, but Daniel didn't move. Some things were more important than dinner. He held his son close, silently vowing to find a way through this maze of prejudice and gossip to show Lucas that kindness could still win in the end. Daniel stood before the town council in the wood-paneled meeting room, his hands steady as he laid out colorful presentation boards. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm rectangles across the polished conference table where 7 council members sat watching him intently. "Thank you all for being here today," Daniel began, his voice calm and clear. "I'd like to propose something I believe could make a real difference in our community." He gestured to the first board, which showed children playing sports and making art together. "The Unity Through Play program." Councilwoman Martinez leaned forward, adjusting her reading glasses. "Tell us more, Mayor Harper. It's simple, really." Daniel moved between the boards as he spoke. "We create after-school activities that bring kids together through sports, art, and music. No barriers, no expectations, just children being children together." Councilman Thompson, a silver-haired man who'd served on the council for 20 years, frowned. "And the cost to taxpayers?" "Minimal," Daniel assured him, pulling out a detailed budget sheet. "We'll use existing facilities, the community center, the park pavilions. Local high school students have already volunteered to help coach and teach. What we mainly need is your support and approval." The council members exchanged glances. Mrs. Weber, who owned the local hardware store, spoke up. "It's a lovely idea, Daniel. But with all the recent tension." She trailed off diplomatically. Daniel took a deep breath. "That's exactly why we need this now. Our children shouldn't inherit our divisions. They deserve a chance to build friendships without prejudice." The room fell quiet. Daniel could hear the old wall clock ticking away seconds. Finally, Councilwoman Martinez smiled. "I move to approve the Unity Through Play program." One by one, hands raised in support. Even Councilman Thompson gave a grudging nod. 6 months trial period, he stipulated. "We'll review the results then." "Thank you," Daniel said sincerely. "I won't let you down." The next morning, Lucas helped Daniel stack bright yellow flyers on their kitchen table. The boy's face lit up as he read the activities list. "Dad, look! They're going to have art classes too!" Daniel smiled, watching his son's excitement. "That's right, buddy. Think you might want to try those?" Lucas nodded eagerly. "Can I help hand these out?" "Please?" "Of course you can." Daniel ruffled his son's hair. "Just remember, some people might not be interested, and that's okay. They spent the morning distributing flyers around town. At the grocery store, Mrs. Johnson's teenage daughter immediately signed up to volunteer. The librarian asked for a stack to display. Even the grumpy owner of the coffee shop put one in his window. But not everyone was supportive. As Daniel and Lucas approached the park, they spotted Karen Mitchell holding court with her usual group of followers. "Well, well," Karen's voice carried across the playground. "If it isn't our charitable mayor, starting a program for losers." She snatched a flyer from a nearby bench, making a show of examining it. How sweet. A pity project for children who can't make real friends. Lucas tensed beside Daniel, but didn't run away this time. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and kept walking, just like his father had taught him. Several mothers shifted uncomfortably, not meeting Karen's eyes. One of them, Julie Anderson, actually stepped away from the group. "I think it sounds wonderful," she said quietly. "My Emma would love the dance classes." Karen's face reddened. "Julie, you can't be serious." But Julie was already taking a flyer from Lucas, smiling warmly at him. "Thank you, sweetheart. Emma will be so excited." Throughout the day, more parents showed interest. The community center's phone started ringing with inquiries. Miss Sarah, the art teacher, offered to lead weekend painting classes. Coach Thompson volunteered the school gym for rainy days. At school the next morning, Lucas stood straighter than usual as he handed out flyers to his classmates. Some kids ignored him, but others stopped to look. Brandon Mitchell, when his mother wasn't around, quietly asked for one. "Really?" Lucas asked, surprised. Brandon nodded quickly. "I like art too," he whispered, stuffing the flyer in his backpack before hurrying away. During lunch period, Lucas sat at his usual corner table. But today was different. Two girls from his class, Emma Anderson and Maria Garcia, asked if they could join him. "We saw the flyers," Emma said, pulling out her sandwich. "Are you really helping with the program?" Lucas nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "My dad says everyone's welcome. We're going to have baseball and art and music." "Cool," Maria grinned. "My little brother wants to learn baseball. Maybe you could help teach him?" For the first time in weeks, Lucas felt truly proud. He wasn't just the mayor's shy son anymore. He was part of something bigger, something good. As he handed out more flyers between classes, he noticed fewer kids avoiding his eyes. Some even smiled back. When the final bell rang, Lucas practically bounced out to meet his father in the parking lot. "Dad! Dad! Guess what? Brandon wants to come to art class, and Emma and Maria sat with me at lunch, and they think the program is awesome." Daniel's heart swelled seeing his son so animated, so full of purpose. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, not just for Lucas, but for all the children in their town. One small step toward bringing people together, starting with the ones whose hearts were still open to friendship. The church gymnasium buzzed with activity on a bright Wednesday afternoon. Sunlight poured through the high windows, creating golden squares on the freshly polished floor. Long tables covered in white butcher paper stretched along the walls, laden with paint bottles, brushes, and cups of water. In the center of the room, a massive blank canvas waited to be transformed into something beautiful. Daniel moved between the groups of children, his sleeves rolled up and a gentle smile on his face. "Remember, there are no wrong ways to make art," he encouraged, patting a young girl's shoulder as she nervously held her paintbrush. "Just paint what makes you happy." Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully mixing blue and yellow paint to create the perfect shade of green. His tongue poked out slightly in concentration as he worked. Around him, other children chattered and laughed, their clothes already spotted with paint despite the oversized smocks they wore. "I think we should make the tree really big," said Sarah, a girl with braided pigtails pointing to the center of their mural. "Like, super huge." "Yeah," Tommy agreed, waving his brush enthusiastically. "And we can all paint our handprints as leaves." Lucas nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. He'd been quiet at first, but the creative atmosphere had slowly drawn him out of his shell. His father had been right. Doing things together made everything less scary. Parents lined the walls, some helping with supplies, others simply watching. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had avoided Daniel at the school drop-off just days ago, now chatted with him about her daughter's art classes. Mr. Peterson, initially skeptical of the program, helped distribute clean water cups while discussing Little League baseball with another father. The gym door creaked open slightly, and Brandon Mitchell's face appeared in the gap. He glanced around nervously, then slipped inside when he saw his mother was nowhere in sight. His shoulders were tense, but his eyes sparkled with interest as he took in the colorful scene. Lucas noticed Brandon first and froze, his paintbrush hovering above the canvas. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, neither boy moved. Then Lucas did something brave. He smiled and waved Brandon over. Brandon hesitated, shifting from foot to foot, before making his way to Lucas's corner of the mural. "What are you painting?" he asked softly, crouching down beside Lucas. "It's going to be a big tree," Lucas explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke about the project. "We're all going to put our handprints on it to make leaves." "That's cool," Brandon said, genuine interest in his voice. He settled down next to Lucas, careful not to knock over any paint cups. "Could I maybe help?" Lucas's face lit up. "Sure, here's an extra brush." He handed Brandon a clean paintbrush, their fingers brushing briefly. "We need to finish the trunk first." The two boys worked side by side, their shoulders occasionally bumping as they reached for different colors. Brandon proved to have a steady hand for detail work, and Lucas admired how he added texture to the tree bark with careful strokes. "You're really good at this," Lucas said, watching Brandon work. Brandon ducked his head, pleased. "Thanks. I like to draw sometimes, but—" He trailed off, glancing toward the door. "Mom says it's a waste of time." "I don't think it's a waste," Lucas said firmly. "Look how nice it's turning out." Daniel watched the interaction from across the room, his heart swelling with pride at his son's kindness. He deliberately kept his distance, not wanting to draw attention to the budding friendship. The boys continued painting together, their initial awkwardness melting away as they discussed favorite colors and comic book characters. Brandon gradually relaxed, his laughter joining the cheerful chorus that filled the gymnasium. The peaceful scene shattered when the gym door burst open with a bang. Karen Mitchell stood in the doorway, her face flushed with anger, designer purse clutched tightly in her manicured hands. "Brandon Mitchell," her voice cut through the happy chatter like a knife. "What do you think you're doing here?" The room fell silent. Brandon's paintbrush clattered to the floor, leaving a brown streak on the butcher paper. His face drained of color as his mother stormed across the gymnasium, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I just wanted to paint," Brandon stammered, scrambling to his feet. Paint stained his jeans, and a smudge of green marked his cheek. "Look at you. You're filthy." Karen grabbed Brandon's arm, yanking him away from the mural. "I told you to stay away from these people." Lucas sat frozen, paint dripping from his forgotten brush onto the floor. Other children stared, some shrinking back against their parents' legs. "Mrs. Mitchell," Daniel started, taking a step forward, but Karen cut him off with a glare. "Save it, Mr. Mayor," she spat the title like an insult. "Come on, Brandon, we're leaving." She dragged Brandon toward the door, his feet stumbling as he tried to keep up with her angry stride. Just before they disappeared through the doorway, Brandon twisted in his mother's grip and looked back at Lucas. His eyes were full of sadness and something else, a quiet longing for the friendship they'd barely begun to build. Then the door slammed shut, and Brandon was gone. The gymnasium remained quiet for a long moment, the happy atmosphere punctured by Karen's dramatic exit. Lucas stared at the unfinished tree trunk, where two different painting styles blended together seamlessly. Next to him lay Brandon's abandoned paintbrush, still wet with brown paint. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of City Hall, casting long shadows across Daniel's desk. Papers were scattered everywhere, budget reports, donation forms, and colorful flyers advertising the upcoming fundraiser. Lucas sat cross-legged in the corner of the office, his box of crayons spread out before him as he worked intently on his latest masterpiece. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at his son with a warm smile. "How's the drawing coming along, buddy?" Lucas held up his paper, revealing a bright scene of stick figures holding hands around what appeared to be the community center.
"It's for the fundraiser, Dad. See? Everyone's together."
A gentle knock on the door interrupted their moment. Sarah, one of the town's longtime residents, poked her head in. "Mayor Harper, I brought the sign-up sheets from the library." She entered, carrying a stack of papers, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "You won't believe how many people have volunteered." Daniel accepted the sheets, his heart lifting as he scanned the names. The list seemed endless. Teachers offering to supervise activities, local artists willing to run workshops, retired folks eager to help with setup and cleanup. This is incredible. And that's not all. Sarah continued, pulling out her phone. The ladies from the church group are organizing a bake sale. Mrs. Thompson is making her famous apple pies, and the Rodriguez family is bringing their traditional Mexican pastries. Lucas perked up at the mention of baked goods, abandoning his drawing to join his father at the desk. Daniel ruffled his son's hair, feeling a surge of hope. "What about the raffle prizes?" "Oh, you should see what people are donating." Sarah's voice bubbled with excitement. "The hardware store is offering a new bicycle. The bookshop has put together 3 huge gift baskets, and even old Mr. Jenkins is donating a handcrafted rocking chair." As they discussed the details, more volunteers dropped by. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop promised centerpieces for every table. The high school art teacher offered to help create decorations with her students. Each visitor brought not just offers of help, but genuine warmth and encouragement that filled Daniel's office with positive energy. Across town, in the Mitchells' expansive kitchen, Karen paced back and forth, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Brandon sat at the counter, pushing his afternoon snack around his plate. "This is getting out of hand," Karen muttered, more to herself than to her son. "Everyone's falling for his act. A fundraiser?" She spat the word like it tasted bitter. "We need to show everyone who he really is, Brandon." Brandon stared at his plate, his shoulders tense. "Mom, maybe." "No maybes." Karen's sharp tone made him flinch. "That man is using his position to help his troubled son, and we're going to prove it." She stopped pacing and fixed Brandon with a stern look. "You've seen things at baseball practice, haven't you? Things that prove Lucas is different?" Brandon's stomach churned. He thought about Lucas sharing his water bottle with him last week when he'd forgotten his own, about their secret high fives when no one was watching. I don't know, Mom." "Think harder," Karen insisted, her voice taking on the honey-sweet tone that Brandon knew meant trouble. "We need to protect our community from people like them." Back at City Hall, the sun had set, and most of the staff had gone home. Daniel gathered his papers while Lucas collected his art supplies, carefully placing each crayon back in the box. "Ready to head home, champ?" Daniel asked, helping Lucas into his jacket. "Can we have cocoa tonight?" Lucas asked, his eyes hopeful. "To celebrate?" Daniel chuckled. "To celebrate what?" "The fundraiser, and all the nice people helping us." Lucas bounced on his toes as they walked to the car. Later that night, in their cozy kitchen, Daniel stirred hot chocolate on the stove, while Lucas sat at the table, still buzzing with energy despite the late hour. The warm smell of cocoa and cinnamon filled the air, making their small house feel extra homey. "Dad, can I help set up the tables at the fundraiser?" Lucas asked, watching steam rise from the pot. "Sarah said they need strong helpers." Daniel poured the hot chocolate into 2 mugs, adding a handful of mini marshmallows to Lucas's. "Of course you can. Just remember to be careful with the heavy stuff." Lucas wrapped his hands around the warm mug, his face glowing with excitement. "I'm going to make sure every table has flowers, just like Mrs. Chen showed me, and maybe I can help hang up my drawing." "That's a great idea," Daniel said, sitting down across from his son. He watched as Lucas took a careful sip, leaving a chocolate mustache on his upper lip. "You know what makes me proudest about all this?" Lucas looked up, curious. What? How you're always thinking about ways to make others feel welcome. That's what this program is all about, bringing people together. Lucas grinned, marshmallow stuck to his teeth. Like Brandon. He told me he wants to come to the fundraiser, even though his mom doesn't like us. Daniel's heart squeezed at the innocent observation. He took a slow sip of his cocoa, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be. The important thing is to keep being kind, just like you are. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying their warm drinks and each other's company. Lucas's excitement about the fundraiser was contagious, and Daniel found himself looking forward to the event with renewed energy. Despite Karen's attempts to undermine him, the community was coming together in ways he hadn't expected, and his son was blossoming in the middle of it all. The town hall sparkled with twinkling lights strung across the high ceiling, while red and white balloons bobbed gently in clusters at every corner. The normally austere municipal building had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space that hummed with excitement and possibility. Folding chairs lined the main hall in neat rows, and a small stage had been set up at the front, complete with a podium and microphone. Daniel stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. He wore his best suit, the navy one he'd bought for his inauguration, and tried to keep his nerves steady as more and more townspeople filtered in. Each person who walked through the doors represented hope for his community outreach program. Lucas stuck close to his father's side, fidgeting with the collar of his dress shirt. He'd insisted on wearing a clip-on tie that matched his father's, and his usually messy hair had been carefully combed to one side. His eyes darted around the room, taking in all the decorations and familiar faces. "The place looks amazing, Mrs. Thompson," the local librarian exclaimed as she entered. She carried a large tray of her famous chocolate chip cookies. "The whole town's been talking about tonight. Thank you for coming," Daniel replied warmly, helping her with the heavy tray. "And for these wonderful cookies." The hall continued to fill as more families arrived. Children darted between adults' legs, their dress shoes clicking on the polished floor. The air filled with the buzz of conversation and the clinking of punch glasses. Even some of the parents who had been distant lately were there, offering tentative smiles. From his spot by the door, Lucas spotted Brandon entering with his mother. Karen wore an expensive-looking dress and held her head high, but Brandon seemed to shrink behind her, his eyes downcast. Lucas gave a small wave, but quickly dropped his hand when Karen shot him a cold look. As the clock struck 7, the town council chairman stepped up to the podium. The crowd settled into their seats, and the gentle background music was lowered. Daniel led Lucas to their reserved seats in the front row. "Good evening, everyone," the chairman began, his voice carrying through the speakers. "We're here tonight to support Mayor Harper's new community outreach program, which aims to bring our children together through sports and the arts." The chairman's speech was followed by several community leaders, each sharing their vision for the program. The audience listened attentively, occasionally breaking into supportive applause. Daniel felt his heart swell with each positive word, each nod of agreement from the crowd. Finally, it was Daniel's turn to speak. He stood slowly, straightening his tie as he approached the podium. The light seemed suddenly brighter, the crowd's eyes all fixed upon him. He opened his mouth to begin his prepared speech, but the words stuck in his throat. That's when something unexpected happened. Lucas stood up from his chair, his small frame trembling slightly but his chin held high. "Can I say something, Dad?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Daniel looked at his son with surprise, then nodded, stepping back from the podium. Lucas walked up, barely tall enough to see over it properly. Someone quickly brought him a step stool. "Hi, everyone," Lucas began, his voice quiet but clear in the microphone. "I'm Lucas Harper, and I want to tell you about kindness." The room fell completely silent. "Sometimes people aren't nice to you," Lucas continued, his voice growing stronger. "Sometimes they make you feel small, or different, or wrong. But my dad taught me that being kind is stronger than being mean. He says that when someone is unkind, that usually means they're hurting inside.
In the audience, Brandon lifted his head, his eyes fixed on Lucas.
"This program isn't just about playing sports or making art," Lucas said. "It's about being friends with people who might seem different from you. It's about forgiving people who hurt you, because maybe they need a friend too." Tears began to appear in the eyes of many audience members. Daniel felt his own eyes growing moist as he watched his son speak from his heart. "My mom died when I was really little." Lucas's voice wavered slightly. "But my dad made sure I knew what love feels like. He says that's what community means, making sure everyone knows what love feels like." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat as several people turned to look at her. "So, I hope you'll help us make this program work," Lucas concluded. "Because everyone deserves a chance to play baseball, or paint pictures, or just have a friend who smiles at them. Thank you." The silence held for a moment before the room erupted in applause. People stood, wiping their eyes and clapping with genuine emotion. Daniel stepped forward to hug his son, his heart overflowing with pride. Then another unexpected moment unfolded. Brandon suddenly stood up, despite his mother's attempt to grab his arm. He walked deliberately to the front of the room, right up to Lucas. The audience watched, holding their breath. Brandon extended his hand. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, but in the hushed room, everyone could hear. "Would you be my friend?" Lucas's face broke into a wide smile as he shook Brandon's hand. The applause grew even louder, and several people were openly crying now. Karen sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and hugs. People lined up to shake Daniel's hand and pat Lucas on the back. Donations poured in for the program, exceeding their most optimistic goals. Even some of the parents who had been influenced by Karen's rumors came forward to apologize and offer their support. As the night wound down, Daniel stood at the back of the hall, watching Lucas and Brandon sitting together at a table, sharing Mrs. Thompson's cookies and talking animatedly about their favorite baseball players. The sight filled him with joy and hope. The town council chairman approached, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. "You've done something remarkable here, Mayor Harper. Your boy's speech, well, I don't think there was a dry eye in the house. You should be proud." Daniel nodded, too moved to speak. The twinkling lights overhead seemed to shine brighter, and the gentle music playing in the background felt like a celebration. For the first time since Karen's campaign against him had begun, he felt truly confident about the future. Looking around at the smiling faces and warm embraces being shared throughout the hall, Daniel knew that this was what community was meant to be. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of the local newspaper office as Karen Mitchell burst through the door, her designer handbag swinging wildly. Her heels clicked sharply against the linoleum floor as she marched straight to the editor's desk, clutching a manila envelope to her chest. "I have proof," she announced, her voice trembling with what sounded like righteous indignation. "Proof that our beloved mayor isn't as honest as he pretends to be." The editor, Jim Barnes, looked up from his computer screen with weary eyes. He'd known Karen for years and was familiar with her tendency for drama.
"What kind of proof, Karen?"
She slapped the envelope down on his desk, spreading out papers with highlighted sections and circled numbers. "Look at these financial records. Daniel Harper has been using town funds for his personal expenses, taking money meant for community programs and spending it on himself and his son." Jim picked up the documents, adjusting his reading glasses. The papers appeared official at first glance. Budget reports, receipts, and bank statements, all seemingly pointing to financial discrepancies. Within hours, the story had spread through the small town like a grass fire. People gathered in small groups outside the coffee shop, the grocery store, and the post office, all discussing the shocking allegations. Phones buzzed with text messages and social media lit up with angry posts. At the elementary school, Lucas sat alone at lunch, picking at his sandwich. He couldn't help but notice how other kids would look his way, then quickly turn to whisper to each other. His teacher had given him concerned looks all morning, and even Brandon, who had shaken his hand just yesterday, wouldn't meet his eyes. "I heard his dad stole money from the town," one girl whispered loudly enough for Lucas to hear. My mom says they might have to leave town, another added. Lucas's sandwich turned to sawdust in his mouth. He wrapped it back up with trembling hands and stuffed it into his lunchbox. His chest felt tight, and his eyes burned with unshed tears. At City Hall, Daniel sat in his office, trying to maintain his composure as council members and staff members walked past his door, their faces a mix of disappointment and suspicion. His assistant, Sarah, brought him a cup of coffee, with sympathy in her eyes. The council's called an emergency meeting, she said softly. They're launching an investigation. Daniel nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He'd spent the morning fielding angry phone calls and responding to heated emails. The fabricated evidence looked convincing enough to raise serious doubts about his integrity. The afternoon dragged on endlessly. Daniel tried to focus on his work, but the whispers in the hallway and the occasional hostile glare from a passing citizen made concentration impossible. His phone kept buzzing with messages from concerned friends and angry constituents. At 3 o'clock, his office door burst open. Lucas ran in, his backpack still on, tears streaming down his face. Dad, he cried, throwing himself into Daniel's arms. Daniel held his son tight, feeling the boy's body shake with sobs. What happened, buddy? Everyone at school. Lucas hiccuped. They're saying awful things about you. They said you're a thief, and we're gonna have to move away. He buried his face in Daniel's shirt. It's not true, right, Dad? Tell me it's not true. Daniel's heart broke as he stroked his son's hair. No, Lucas, it's not true. Sometimes, people believe lies because they're angry or scared, but the truth always comes out in the end. But why would they say those things? Lucas pulled back, his face red and tear-stained. Why does Karen hate us so much? Before Daniel could answer, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face grave. Mr. Harper? This just came for you. She held out an official-looking envelope. Daniel gently released Lucas and took the envelope. The town council seal was stamped in the corner. His hands felt numb as he opened it and unfolded the letter inside. The words seemed to blur together, but their meaning was clear enough. He was being summoned to a formal hearing to address the allegations of financial misconduct. Lucas watched his father's face carefully. What is it, Dad? Daniel couldn't bring himself to answer. He stared out the window at the town square below, where people went about their daily business, some stopping to point up at his office window. The letter crumpled in his fist as the weight of everything pressed down on him. The trust he'd worked so hard to build, the community he'd tried to unite, the future he'd dreamed of for his son. It all seemed to be slipping away, like sand, through his fingers. The setting sun cast long shadows across his office floor, and in that moment, Daniel Harper, the mayor who had promised to lead with kindness and unity, felt more alone than he had since the day he'd lost his wife. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the crushing silence of the Harper household. Outside, the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in muted oranges and purples, but inside, shadows crept along the walls like unwelcome guests. Daniel sat at the worn wooden table, his fork pushing a piece of chicken back and forth across his plate. The sound of metal scraping against ceramic echoed through the quiet room. Across from him, Lucas mirrored his father's actions, his small hand listlessly moving peas around in aimless circles. His shoulders slumped forward, and his usual bright eyes were fixed downward, refusing to meet his father's gaze. The boy's baseball uniform still hung on the back of his chair, unworn since that morning when he'd refused to go to practice. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to break the heavy silence. The green beans are good tonight, aren't they? His attempt at normalcy fell flat, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. Lucas didn't respond. Instead, his lower lip trembled slightly as he continued to stare at his plate. Son? Daniel tried again, softer this time. You need to eat something. I'm not hungry, Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible. His fork clattered against his plate as he set it down, his small hands disappearing beneath the table to twist in his lap. Daniel watched his son, his heart aching at the sight of Lucas's obvious distress. The boy's normally neat hair was disheveled from running his hands through it anxiously throughout the day, a habit he'd picked up recently. "Dad?" Lucas's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, buddy? I heard Mrs. Wilson at school today." Lucas's words came out in a rush, like he couldn't hold them back anymore. "She said you might lose your job because of me." Daniel's fork froze midway to his mouth. "Lucas, that's not. It's true though, isn't it?" Lucas's eyes finally met his father's, brimming with tears. "If I hadn't tried to be friends with Brandon, if I hadn't gone to that baseball game, if I hadn't—" His voice broke completely. "I ruined everything. I ruined your job. I ruined your life." The words hit Daniel like physical blows. He pushed his chair back from the table, the legs scraping against the floor, and moved around to kneel beside his son's chair. "Lucas, look at me." The boy turned, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "None of this is your fault. None of it." Daniel reached up to wipe away his son's tears with his thumb. "You did nothing wrong. You were just being yourself. Kind and friendly and everything I've always taught you to be. But Mrs. Mitchell's actions are her choice. Her hatred, her lies, those belong to her, not you." Daniel's voice wavered slightly. "Never you." Lucas's bottom lip quivered. "But what if they make you stop being mayor? What if everyone believes her lies?" His small hands clutched at his father's shirt.
I heard people talking. They're saying mean things about us. About you."
Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. The weight of the past few weeks. The whispers. The accusations. The investigation. Pressed down on him. Like a physical burden. He sank further to the floor, sitting cross-legged beside Lucas's chair. "I don't know, buddy," he admitted quietly. "I've always believed that kindness wins in the end. That if we just stay true to who we are, if we keep doing what's right." He trailed off, his own eyes growing wet. "But sometimes I wonder if that's enough." Lucas slid off his chair and into his father's lap, wrapping his arms around Daniel's neck. "Are you going to quit?" The question hung in the air between them. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he held his son. "I've been thinking about it," he confessed. "Maybe it would be easier. Maybe it would protect you from all of this." "But you always said we shouldn't let bullies win," Lucas whispered into his father's shoulder. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He could feel hot tears sliding down his own cheeks now. "I did say that, didn't I?" He pulled back slightly to look at his son's face. "But sometimes being a parent means making hard choices. And seeing you hurt like this." His voice broke. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe kindness isn't enough to fight against people who are willing to lie and hurt others." Lucas's small face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." He buried his face in his father's shirt, his thin shoulders shaking with sobs. Daniel held him tighter, rocking slightly back and forth on the kitchen floor. No, baby. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing at all." But his own voice was thick with tears, his certainty in everything he'd believed in wavering like a candle flame in the wind. They sat there together until Lucas's sobs quieted into hiccups. Daniel finally stood, his knees protesting from sitting on the hard floor. "Time for bed, buddy. It's been a long day." Lucas nodded, exhausted from crying. Daniel helped him change into his pajamas and tucked him into bed. But the boy's eyes were still red and wet. "Dad," he called out as Daniel turned to leave. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course." Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, running his fingers through his son's hair until the boy's breathing eventually evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Even then, occasional hitches in his breath betrayed the tears that had followed him into his dreams. Daniel pressed a gentle kiss to his son's forehead before quietly leaving the room. He made his way to the living room, where he sank heavily into his old armchair. The house was dark except for the warm glow of the table lamp beside him, casting long shadows across the walls. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as the weight of everything finally crashed over him. The lamp flickered, its light wavering like his faith in the power of kindness, as Daniel sat alone in the darkness, crushed between his principles and his love for his son. The school hallway buzzed with the usual lunchtime chatter, but today the words seemed sharper, more cruel. Brandon Mitchell stood by his locker, his stomach in knots as he watched a group of boys snickering and pointing at Lucas Harper, who sat alone at the far end of the corridor, hunched over his sketchbook. "Did you hear about his dad?" One boy whispered loudly. "My mom says he's stealing money from the town. No wonder they live in that tiny house," another added with a mean laugh. "Bet they're hiding all the cash under the floorboards." Lucas's shoulders hunched further, his pencil pressing so hard against the paper that Brandon could see it tearing from where he stood. The sight made Brandon's chest hurt. He knew the truth, every bitter, ugly detail of it. His mother's late-night phone calls, her whispered conversations, the way she'd made him practice what to say if anyone asked about Daniel Harper. "Hey, Lucas," one of the bigger boys called out. "Does your dad know he's going to jail?" Something snapped inside Brandon. The weight of lies his mother had forced him to carry became too heavy to bear. "Stop it!" he shouted, his voice echoing down the hallway. Everyone turned to stare at him, including Lucas, whose eyes were red-rimmed and wet. "My mom made it all up." Brandon's words tumbled out, hands shaking. "She told me to lie. Mayor Harper didn't do anything wrong. She just hates him because he's nice to everyone and she can't stand it." The hallway fell silent. Mrs. Peterson, the English teacher, stepped out of her classroom, her face concerned. "Brandon? What did you just say?" Brandon's heart hammered in his chest, but he stood straighter. "My mother made up all those stories about Mayor Harper. She forced me to go along with it, but I can't anymore." "It's not right." Mrs. Peterson's expression turned serious. "Come with me to the principal's office, Brandon. We need to discuss this." As Brandon followed her, he caught Lucas's eye. For the first time in weeks, Lucas offered a small, grateful smile. In Principal Wagner's office, Brandon's hands wouldn't stop trembling as he told everything. How his mother had created fake documents on their home computer. How she'd coached him on what to say if anyone asked questions. How she'd threatened to take away his baseball privileges if he didn't cooperate. Principal Wagner made several phone calls while Brandon sat there, including one to the town council. "This is a very serious matter," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Would you be willing to tell the council what you've told me?" Brandon nodded, though his insides felt like ice. "Yes, it's the right thing to do." Word spread through the school like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, everyone knew that Brandon Mitchell had exposed his mother's lies. As he walked to his locker, some kids patted him on the back, calling him brave. Others whispered and pointed, but differently now, with respect, instead of malice. But when Brandon stepped outside, his mother's silver SUV was already waiting in the pickup line, and his courage nearly failed him. Karen Mitchell's face was twisted with rage as she stormed toward him, her heels clicking against the pavement like angry exclamation points. "Get in the car right now," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Brandon pulled away, his heart racing. "I told the truth, Mom. I'm not going to lie anymore." "You ungrateful little." She reached for him again, but Brandon was faster. Years of baseball practice had made him quick, and he darted through the crowd of students and parents. "Brandon Mitchell, you come back here this instant." His mother's shrill voice carried across the schoolyard, but he didn't stop. He ran past the baseball field where this had all started, past the church where he'd secretly drawn pictures with Lucas, past the coffee shop where his mother had spread her first lies. His legs burned and his backpack bounced painfully against his spine, but he kept going. Brandon knew exactly where he needed to go. The modest white house at the end of Maple Street came into view. The Harper residence. His mother would never think to look for him there. His hands were shaking as he climbed the porch steps and rang the doorbell. The door opened, and Mayor Harper stood there, looking tired but kind as always. Brandon's words came out in a rush. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harper. My mom made everything up. And I helped her, but I couldn't take it anymore. I told the principal, and I want to tell the council too, but my mom, she's really mad, and I didn't know where else to go, and— Breathe, Brandon, Daniel said softly, placing a steady hand on Brandon's trembling shoulder. Come inside. You're safe here. Brandon stepped into the warm house, his legs finally giving out as he sank onto the nearest chair. Through the window, he could see the street where he'd run from his mother, and he started shaking again. But for the first time in weeks, despite his fear, he felt something else too. The lightness that comes with finally telling the truth. The council chamber's polished wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town. Evening sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Daniel Harper sat in the front row, his shoulders straight despite the exhaustion evident in his face. Next to him, Lucas fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, stealing glances at Brandon, who sat stiffly beside his mother across the aisle. Karen Mitchell's designer dress and perfect makeup couldn't hide the tension in her jaw as she glared straight ahead. Her manicured nails dug into the wooden bench, knuckles white with strain. Council President Thompson, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, called the emergency session to order. The bang of her gavel echoed through the hushed chamber. We're here today to address serious allegations regarding Mayor Daniel Harper's conduct in office, she announced, her voice steady and clear. Daniel squeezed Lucas's shoulder gently. The boy looked up at his father, worry creasing his young face. Before we proceed with the evidence presented by Mrs. Mitchell, Thompson continued, we have an unexpected witness who has come forward. Brandon Mitchell? A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as Brandon stood. Karen's hand shot out to grab his arm, but he pulled away. His sneakers squeaked against the hardwood floor as he walked to the front of the chamber. It's okay, Brandon, Thompson said softly. Just tell us what you know. Brandon's hands trembled as he gripped the podium. His voice started quiet but grew stronger with each word. I need to tell the truth. My mom. He paused, swallowing hard. My mom made up the stories about Mayor Harper. She made me lie. Gasps filled the room. Karen jumped to her feet. Brandon Mitchell, you sit down right now. Her voice cracked with fury and panic. Mrs. Mitchell, please be seated, Thompson warned, banging her gavel. Brandon's eyes welled with tears, but he continued. She told me to say I saw Mayor Harper taking money from the fundraiser, but it wasn't true. She made me practice the lie over and over. His voice shook. She said if I didn't help her, she'd take away my baseball and make me switch schools. Karen's face had gone chalk white. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. I do know. Brandon's voice rang out stronger now. You made me lie because you hate Lucas and his dad. But they're good people. Lucas is my friend, and Mayor Harper helps everyone in town. You just wanted to hurt them because you're mean. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Lucas stared at Brandon with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. I have proof, Brandon added, pulling a phone from his pocket. I recorded Mom talking about her plan. His hands shook as he handed the device to Council President Thompson. Karen lunged forward. That's my personal property! But two council members blocked her path. Thompson played the recording. Karen's voice filled the chamber, clear and unmistakable. Just stick to the story, Brandon. Nobody will know it's a lie. That self-righteous Daniel Harper needs to learn his place. Turn that off, Karen screamed, her carefully maintained composure shattering completely. This is ridiculous. You can't believe a child over me. I'm a respected member of this community. Mrs. Mitchell. Thompson's voice cut through the chaos. These recordings, combined with your son's testimony, completely exonerate Mayor Harper. Furthermore, they implicate you in a serious case of defamation and false accusations. The council members nodded in agreement. Daniel sat quietly, his face showing not triumph, but compassion, even as Karen's world crumbled around her. This council formally withdraws all allegations against Mayor Daniel Harper. Thompson declared. "And we offer our sincere apologies for any distress caused to him and his family." The chamber burst into applause. People stood, cheering and clapping. Lucas threw his arms around his father, burying his face in Daniel's shirt. Daniel held his son tight, tears of relief streaming down his face. Karen, her makeup streaked with tears, stumbled backward. "This isn't happening," she choked out. All eyes were on her as she turned and fled the chamber, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor until the heavy doors slammed behind her. Brandon stood alone at the podium, shoulders slumped with relief. Daniel gently released Lucas and walked over to the boy, placing a kind hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Brandon," he said softly. "What you did took real courage." The applause grew louder as Lucas joined them, offering Brandon a shy smile. The two boys looked at each other, no longer separated by their parents' conflict, just two friends standing together in the warm evening light of the council chamber. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over Daniel Harper's modest two-story home. The front porch, usually quiet at this hour, bustled with activity as neighbors streamed up the wooden steps carrying covered dishes, bouquets of flowers, and handwritten cards. The sweet scent of freshly baked pies mingled with the crisp spring air. Lucas stood beside his father in the doorway, his eyes wide with wonder at the outpouring of support. His small hands clutched the edge of Daniel's jacket as each visitor approached, but his smile grew broader with every kind word offered. "Mayor Harper, we never doubted you for a second," Mrs. Thompson from the bakery declared, pressing a still warm apple pie into Daniel's hands. The elderly woman's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "And Lucas, dear, you were so brave through all of this." Lucas ducked his head shyly, but couldn't hide his grin. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." More neighbors arrived, filling their living room with chatter and laughter. The coffee table disappeared under a growing collection of casseroles and desserts. Bright flower arrangements transformed the simple space into something festive. Coach Martinez brought his signature lasagna, while the Anderson family carried in a handmade banner that read, "We stand with the Harpers." Daniel moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and handshakes with grace. His quiet strength seemed to touch everyone present, as he responded to each person with the same genuine kindness he'd shown throughout the ordeal. "The support means more than you know," he kept saying, his voice thick with emotion. Lucas had just finished showing Mr. Peterson his latest baseball cards when the front door creaked open again. The conversation in the room quieted as Brandon Mitchell stood uncertainly in the doorway, his baseball glove clutched tightly in his hands. He wore a clean t-shirt and jeans, but his shoulders were hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. I hope it's okay that I came," Brandon said softly, his eyes darting between Daniel and Lucas. Daniel stepped forward, his face softening with compassion. "Brandon, you're always welcome here." He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "What you did today took real courage." Brandon's eyes welled with tears.
I'm so sorry about everything, my mom. I should have said something sooner.
"Hey now." Daniel knelt to Brandon's eye level, speaking quietly but firmly. "You spoke up when it mattered most. That's what counts." Lucas moved closer, studying his former friend's face. The tension that had existed between them seemed to dissolve as their eyes met. Brandon pulled something from his back pocket, a folded piece of paper. "I kept the drawing we did together at the community workshop," Brandon admitted, "even when Mom said I couldn't talk to you anymore." Lucas's face lit up.
Really? I kept working on mine, too.
He grabbed Brandon's hand.
Want to see? I've got it in my room.
The two boys thundered up the stairs, their footsteps echoing through the house. The adults exchanged knowing smiles, and the party resumed its cheerful atmosphere. Mrs. Thompson wiped a tear from her eye, mumbling something about the innocence of children. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd thinned until only a few neighbors remained, chatting quietly in small groups. Through the living room window, Daniel watched Brandon and Lucas in the backyard. They had found Lucas's baseball and were taking turns throwing it back and forth, their laughter carrying across the grass. The sight filled Daniel's heart with a profound sense of peace. The boys moved with the easy companionship of true friends, as if the painful events of the past weeks had never happened. Their natural bond had survived adult prejudices and schemes, emerging stronger for having been tested. Lucas made a particularly good catch, and Brandon cheered. "Just like in the championship game," he called out, referencing their shared dream of the upcoming tournament. Daniel leaned against the window frame, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally release from his shoulders. The warm spring breeze carried the sweet scent of flowering trees, and the late sunlight painted everything in soft, forgiving hues. In this moment, watching the boys play, he saw the truth of what he'd always believed: that kindness and understanding could bridge any divide. Mrs. Thompson appeared at his elbow, following his gaze to the backyard. "Those boys sure bounced back quick," she observed, her voice gentle. Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Children have a way of showing us what really matters. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the impromptu baseball game unfold. Brandon and Lucas had switched to practicing their pitching stances, mimicking their favorite professional players with exaggerated movements that sent them both into fits of giggles. The peace that settled over Daniel went deeper than mere relief at having his name cleared. It was the peace of seeing hope fulfilled, of witnessing the power of truth and forgiveness to heal what hatred had tried to break. In the simple sight of two boys playing catch, he saw the future he'd always envisioned for their small town, one where friendship trumped prejudice and where kindness prevailed over fear. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of First Presbyterian Church, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. The usual pre-service chatter filled the sanctuary, but there was a noticeable bubble of silence around Karen Mitchell, who sat rigid and alone in the back row. Her designer dress and perfectly styled hair couldn't mask her obvious discomfort as congregation members deliberately chose seats far from her. Her son Brandon had chosen to sit with his father in the front rows, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions in solitude. She clutched her leather-bound hymnal so tightly her knuckles turned white, trying to appear dignified despite the sideways glances and whispered conversations that died whenever anyone passed near her pew. The organ music swelled, signaling the start of service. Pastor Roberts stepped up to the pulpit, his weathered face kind but serious as he welcomed the congregation. Karen kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, pretending not to notice when several people shifted away from her section during the opening hymn. Daniel Harper sat in his usual spot, 5 rows from the front, with Lucas pressed close to his side. The morning light caught the silver at his temples, and his face showed no trace of the strain from the previous week's ordeal. He sang the hymns in his quiet, steady voice, occasionally squeezing Lucas's shoulder when his son looked up at him. During the announcements, Pastor Roberts asked Daniel to come forward and speak about the community outreach program. Karen's face flushed deep red as Daniel made his way to the front, remembering how she'd tried to destroy this man's reputation. She stared hard at her hymnal, refusing to look up. "Good morning," Daniel began, his voice warm and clear. "I'd like to thank everyone for their support during these challenging times. But today, I'm not here to talk about the past week's difficulties. I'm here to talk about moving forward, together." Karen's head snapped up despite herself. Daniel's eyes swept the congregation, and for a brief moment, they met hers. There was no anger there, no triumph or condemnation. "Our community has faced division," he continued. "We've seen how whispers and accusations can tear at the fabric of our town. But we've also witnessed how truth and kindness can heal those tears." He paused, his hands resting lightly on the pulpit. "Today, I want to extend forgiveness to those who sought to harm my family, and I ask all of you to do the same." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Karen's hands began to tremble. "Mrs. Mitchell," Daniel said gently, and every head turned toward her. "I forgive you, and I hope others will follow this example. Holding on to bitterness only hurts us all." Karen's carefully maintained composure cracked. Her lower lip quivered as the weight of his words and her own actions pressed down on her. The whispers around her now held a different tone, one of surprise and uncertainty. "The Bible teaches us about grace," Daniel continued, "about extending mercy even when it's difficult. especially when it's difficult. Our children are watching how we handle our conflicts. They're learning from our example about what it means to be a community. In the front row, Brandon turned slightly, catching his mother's eye. For the first time in weeks, he didn't immediately look away. Karen felt something break inside her chest. The choir rose for the morning anthem, their voices lifting in harmony. Amazing Grace filled the sanctuary, its familiar melody carrying both comfort and conviction. Karen sat absolutely still, feeling exposed and vulnerable as the music washed over her. A tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, followed by another. The congregation stood to join the final verses, but Karen remained seated, trembling. The words blurred on the page before her as more tears fell, silent but unstoppable. Around her, voices raised in song, about being lost and found, about grace that taught the heart to fear, and grace that relieved those fears. She could hear Daniel's voice among them, steady and sure. The same voice that had just publicly offered her forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. The same man she had tried so hard to destroy was now extending a hand of mercy, asking others to do the same. The sunlight continued to paint its rainbow patterns across the pews as the choir sang on, and Karen Mitchell sat alone in her back pew, tears streaming down her face, finally beginning to understand the true cost of her pride. The morning of the Little League Championship dawned bright and crisp, with just enough autumn chill to make the metal bleachers cool to the touch. By noon, the stands were overflowing with excited families bearing homemade signs, team flags, and coolers full of celebratory snacks. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as both teams warmed up on the freshly chalked field. Daniel Harper stood near the dugout, his heart swelling with pride as he watched Lucas practicing throws with Brandon. The two boys had become inseparable over the past few weeks, their friendship growing stronger despite everything that had happened. Their matching blue and white uniforms gleamed in the sunlight as they tossed the ball back and forth, their laughter carrying across the field. "Looking good out there, boys," Daniel called, earning waves from both kids. Other parents clustered around him, sharing nervous smiles and words of encouragement. The championship game against the rival town's team had everyone on edge. Their Eagles hadn't won the title in 5 years. Coach Martinez gathered the team for a pregame huddle. "All right, Eagles," he said, his voice firm but warm. "We've practiced hard for this moment. Remember what matters most: playing fair, supporting each other, and having fun. The rest will take care of itself." Lucas glanced at his father, who gave him a reassuring thumbs up. The boy's shoulders straightened, and he high-fived Brandon as they took their positions, Lucas at second base, Brandon in center field. The first few innings passed in a blur of action. Both teams played their hearts out, neither gaining a significant advantage. The crowd roared with each hit and groaned with each out. Parents leaned forward on the bleachers, clutching water bottles and rally towels, their voices growing hoarse from cheering. By the bottom of the 9th inning, the Eagles were down by 1 run, 5-4. The tension in the stadium was palpable. 2 outs already marked the scoreboard, and Brandon had just managed to get on base with a solid single to left field. Lucas stepped up to the plate, his batting helmet looking slightly too big for his head. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he watched his son dig his cleats into the dirt, adjusting his grip on the bat just as they'd practiced countless times in their backyard. "You've got this, Lucas," Brandon shouted from first base, bouncing on his toes. The pitcher wound up and delivered a fastball that Lucas watched zip past. "Strike 1, called the umpire. Daniel could see Lucas take a deep breath, just like they'd discussed during their practice sessions. Stay calm. Focus on the ball. The second pitch came in. Another strike that had Lucas swinging too early. The crowd held its collective breath. One more strike would end the game and the Eagles' championship dreams. Lucas stepped out of the batter's box for a moment, tapping his cleats with his bat, a nervous habit Daniel recognized all too well. "Remember what we practiced, son," Daniel called out, his voice carrying across the sudden hush that had fallen over the field. "Just like in the backyard." Lucas nodded, stepping back into position. The pitcher looked in for the sign, wound up, and released the ball. Time seemed to slow down as the white sphere approached the plate. Lucas's swing was smooth and level, just as he'd practiced hundreds of times. Crack! The sound of bat meeting ball echoed across the field. The ball soared high and deep into right field. Brandon took off running the moment he heard contact, his legs pumping as fast as they could go. The right fielder backpedaled, reaching up desperately as the ball sailed over his glove and bounced to the fence. Brandon rounded second base as Lucas sprinted toward first. The crowd was on its feet, screaming and cheering. Daniel's heart thundered in his chest as he watched Brandon round third, heading for home. The right fielder finally got to the ball and threw it in, but Brandon had already crossed home plate with the tying run. Lucas was rounding second base now, running faster than Daniel had ever seen him move. The relay throw came in from the outfield as Lucas approached third base. Coach Martinez, working as third base coach, windmilled his arm frantically, sending Lucas home. "Go, go, go!" the crowd chanted as Lucas sprinted toward home plate, his cleats kicking up dirt behind him. The throw came in from the infield. It was going to be close. Lucas dove headfirst, stretching out toward the plate just as the catcher received the ball. A cloud of dust obscured the play for a heart-stopping moment. Then the umpire's arms shot out wide. "Safe!" he bellowed. The stadium erupted. Players poured out of the dugout as Lucas stood up, his uniform now covered in dirt, but his face split by the biggest grin Daniel had ever seen. Brandon was the first to reach him, lifting Lucas onto his shoulders as their teammates swarmed around them. "Lucas! Lucas! Lucas!" the crowd chanted as the team bounced around home plate in a celebratory mob. Parents rushed onto the field, cameras flashing, capturing the moment of pure joy. Daniel stood at the edge of the celebration, wiping tears from his eyes as he watched Lucas beam from his perch on Brandon's shoulders. The boys were both laughing, their earlier troubles forgotten in this moment of shared triumph. The rest of the team clustered around them, jumping and cheering, their enthusiasm infectious. The Eagles players formed a tight circle, arms around each other's shoulders, as they began their victory chant. Lucas and Brandon stood side by side in the circle, their dirty uniforms and sweat-streaked faces testament to their hard work. The championship trophy gleamed in the late afternoon sun as Coach Martinez carried it toward the celebrating team. The town square glowed with hundreds of twinkling lights strung between lampposts and trees, casting a warm golden glow over the celebrating crowd. Red, white, and blue bunting draped from building facades, and colorful balloons bobbed gently in the evening breeze. The scent of grilled hot dogs, fresh popcorn, and sweet cotton candy wafted through the air, mixing with the sound of children's laughter and live music from the local band playing on the gazebo stage. Daniel Harper walked hand in hand with Lucas through the festival, both of them still wearing their baseball uniforms from the championship game. Pride swelled in Daniel's chest as he watched his son's face light up at the sights and sounds around them. Lucas's shoulders, once hunched with uncertainty, now stood straight and confident. "Look, Dad." Lucas pointed excitedly at a ring toss game. "Can we try that one?" "Of course, buddy." Daniel squeezed his son's hand. "Tonight is all about celebrating." As they made their way through the crowd, people stopped to congratulate them, not just for the baseball victory, but for something far more meaningful. Mrs. Thompson, who ran the local bakery, pressed a paper bag of fresh cookies into Lucas's hands. "You boys earned these," she said with a warm smile. "Both of you showed us what real strength looks like." Mr. Rodriguez, the high school baseball coach, clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "You've done more than win a game, Mayor Harper. You've shown this town what leadership really means." The festival had transformed the usually quiet town square into a vibrant celebration of community. Food vendors lined the brick walkways, strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, and families gathered at picnic tables sharing meals and stories. The atmosphere hummed with a sense of unity that felt both precious and hard-won. Near the central fountain, Daniel spotted Brandon Mitchell helping younger kids throw balls at a dunk tank. The boy who had once been caught between loyalty to his mother and his own conscience now laughed freely, his own shoulders unburdened by secrets. As Daniel approached the temporary stage set up for announcements, the crowd began to gather. Parents called their children close, and the band's music faded to a quiet stop. The evening sky had deepened to a rich purple, perfect for the upcoming fireworks display. Daniel stepped up to the microphone, holding Lucas's hand. The faces before him showed nothing but warmth and support. Such a change from the suspicious glances of just weeks ago. He cleared his throat, emotion making his voice slightly rough. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "tonight we celebrate more than just a baseball championship. We celebrate the power of choosing kindness over division, truth over deception, and forgiveness over bitterness." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. In the back, Daniel noticed Karen Mitchell standing quietly with a small group of other parents. Though still somewhat isolated, she wasn't completely alone. A small step toward healing. "This town faced a choice," Daniel continued, "between letting fear drive us apart or letting love bring us together. You chose love. You chose to stand up for truth. You chose to embrace every child, every family, as worthy of respect and friendship." Lucas tugged at his father's sleeve and whispered something. Daniel smiled and nodded, stepping back to let his son speak into the microphone. "Thank you for being nice to me and my dad," Lucas said simply, his voice clear and strong. "And thank you for being nice to Brandon, too. He's my best friend now." As if on cue, Brandon pushed through the crowd, grinning. "Lucas, come on! They're setting up the fireworks." Lucas looked up at his father with questioning eyes. Daniel nodded, and the two boys ran off together, their laughter trailing behind them, as they joined a group of their teammates near the viewing area. "That right there," Daniel gestured to the running boys, "is what we're really celebrating, the friendship of children, untainted by prejudice, showing us the way forward." The crowd applauded, and several people wiped tears from their eyes. The local band struck up a gentle melody, as families began spreading blankets on the grass for the fireworks display. Daniel made his way through the crowd, accepting handshakes and hugs, until he reached Lucas and Brandon. The boys had found a perfect spot on a small hill, where they sat cross-legged on a checkered blanket, their heads tilted back in anticipation. "Mind if I join you?" Daniel asked. "Sure, Dad." Lucas patted the space beside him. "Brandon says these are going to be the best fireworks ever." "They always are," Brandon agreed, then added more seriously, "Thanks, Mr. Harper, for everything." Daniel settled onto the blanket, just as the first fireworks screamed into the sky, bursting into a shower of red and gold sparks. The crowd gasped in delight, and more colorful explosions followed, painting the night sky with brilliant light. As the display continued, Daniel wrapped an arm around Lucas's shoulders and bowed his head slightly, whispering a quiet prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for giving us strength when we needed it most. Thank you for showing us that love really can overcome hatred." The crowd's cheers merged with the boom of fireworks, creating a symphony of joy and unity. Each burst of light revealed faces upturned in wonder. Faces of all kinds, all ages, all together. The town that had nearly been torn apart by prejudice now sat as one family under the glittering sky. Lucas leaned against his father's shoulder, his eyes reflecting the sparkles above. "Dad?" he whispered between explosions. "Yes, son? I'm really glad we didn't give up." Daniel hugged him closer, his heart full. "Me too, buddy. Me too." The fireworks reached their finale, filling the sky with cascading colors and thunderous applause. The crowd cheered, their voices joining in a celebration of not just the display, but of their renewed community spirit. As the last sparks faded into the darkness, the warm glow of understanding remained. A reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal when treated with compassion and courage. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Harper, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.